Hi, I'm Chris. I'm going to be building a pedalboard today. I'm going to show you how I designed it and the whole process of building the board. I won't get into like the numbers and specifics like that because it'll be way too long and boring of a video. I also apologize for the loud noise. It's like 100 degrees here today and I'm in the garage. So it's just a fan and you win some, you lose some. When I originally designed the board, I had the handful of pedals that I was going to be using on the board, and I sat them out in various arrangements to sort of see for a signal path and how much space I would need to physically have on the board in order to accommodate the pedals, the power supply, all the cables between the pedals. So once I figured out roughly how I wanted it set up, I laid them out with cables plugged into them and then took some rough measurements to kind of figure out what I needed internally in order to house everything. I also knew that I wanted to experiment with more pedals, so I wanted a little bit of extra space, so I left some extra space in. I kind of accounted for that in my initial measurements. The issue I'm having though is that there's just too much space, and then having two rows on top really isn't the best because you end up having to kind of reach a bit in an awkward way. So I'm going to stick with the same design because I like the design. I'm going to go about building it slightly differently and then remove about 5 inches of height or depth to the board to make it a little bit more compact but still accommodate the same number of pedals. Once you have the rough measurements of what it is you're building, then you start doing some math to figure out how much wood you're actually going to need. So the design for my specific pedal board is basically a box with a shelf in it. So I measured out the outer dimensions and then I accounted for the thickness of the wood. Did some math to kind of figure out what dimension of lumber I was going to need in order to actually not run out and have to run back to the hardware store. For my particular build, I have 2 sheets of 2x4 Baltic birch plywood. And I'm also going to be wrapping it in either a tolex or some sort of vinyl. So the next thing you'll do is once you have all your math done, you will set up a cut list so that you know how many what dimension you need. Be sure to account for the fact that you're going to lose some of the wood to the blade. So there's an 1/8 inch thick, I think it's called a kerf. I really don't know too much about woodworking. I just know that you lose the thickness of the blade, and I've got an 1/8 inch blade on there. Also know that since I'm building a box, there's gonna be some butt joints where the wood will line up, and some of it will be inset completely with another piece, and then other parts of it are gonna be outside of that. So in order to account for those measurements, you just measure the thickness of the wood that you're using and then add that around, right? So I've got one piece that's gonna be, I don't know if you can see it, there's gonna be one piece that's fully inset, so it's gonna be the accurate measurement, cut it as it is, and then there's gonna be one piece that's gonna fully overhang all the other pieces, so that we're gonna add the thickness all the way around, and then there's gonna be one set that is just one of the dimensions is gonna be slightly longer in order to fully encapsulate that fully inset one. Just keep that stuff in mind when you make your cut list. Have a cut list, and then as you're cutting things, start marking off the things that you've got so you're not accidentally cutting something and then you have to go back to the hardware store again. After I cut everything on the table saw, I took all the pieces to the workbench and then I compared what I had to my cut list to make sure everything was accounted for and cut correctly. I then did a dry fit, which is literally just stacking the pieces together, like basically building off the box without gluing or fastening them together. This is just to make sure that I, again, have everything that I need and I cut it to the correct dimensions. It's a good thing I did this because it turns out a couple of the pieces were cut to the wrong dimension. They were too small, so I had to recut them. If I had started gluing this up and found out during the glue up process this would have been a nightmare to resolve and a lot more work. After I recut those pieces and I did a dry fit and made sure that I had everything, I then went on to the actual glue up process. Luckily, by doing a dry fit, you can kind of think about the order of operations that you're going to take in order to actually glue everything together. I had all my clamps ready, I had paper towels ready, glue I'd apply to both surfaces and then spread and then push them together, apply the clamps, and just kind of make sure that as I'm going that I am cleaning any squeeze out of the glue and making sure everything's staying square before kind of putting the final turns on each of the clamps. Once the box dried, I let it dry overnight. It doesn't have to dry overnight, it just happened to be late and hot, so I left. Once it dried, I had a fully formed box, but then I needed to cut the box. I didn't film this part because I was a little bit nervous about the process, but basically I figured out how thick the bottom needed to be versus the top, which would end up being the literal case top that would protect the pedals. I measured that out, set that up on the table saw, and then I was able to run it through and then turn the workpiece on each side once, pass it through. Everything lined up perfectly. I just went and took my time with it. And what ended up being left over was what you're seeing here on the screen. Basically a really small bottom piece and a much bigger, larger top piece. Speaking of things I didn't film the wrapping process. I'm going to link a video that I used just to learn more about how to wrap tolex or tweed, or basically just wrapping boxes in fabric. Here it is. It's done. That was a tremendous amount of work and a lot more trips to the hardware store than I had hoped it would be. But I'm very proud of this. It came out really well. I mean, like always, it has its quirks. There's definitely a lot of pluses over the previous build that this is based on. If I was to do it all over again right now, I would probably expand the top tier just slightly so I have a little bit more space underneath to make the wiring a little bit easier. It's a little tight under there, but overall it's significantly smaller than my previous build. It holds majority of the pedals. I only did away with the looper, and yeah, it came out great. In the back I opted to do 4 ins and outs, so right now I'm only using an input and an output, but it gives me the option to do effects into the effects loop if I wanted to, or the option to kind of run a stereo rig. I probably won't end up using those, but it's kind of nice to know that I don't have to build a whole new board or kind of do a workaround to make the board work with those options. There's a couple new pedals to me. I have the WildWood Mjolnir and the 1347 Fuzz, which I actually haven't had a chance to really dig into. I was in the middle of building the pedal board when these arrived, so I'll probably make another video where I sort of like kind of tone hunt with the entire board and get the board kind of set up, just to kind of find some sounds and figure out what all of this can do together. If you found this video entertaining at all, or you found anything useful in it, please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing. Just trying to learn more about
gear and music and all sorts of stuff like that, and just have more conversations about those things. So consider doing that if you found any value in this video. Anyway, thanks for watching.